Colt didn't have a lot of success with his early patent firearms company based in Paterson. But one of his best customers was the new Republic of Texas. And he sold a lot of guns to Texas. He sold about 1,000 of his Model 1839 revolving shotguns there, and he sold a ton of Patersons. And these Patersons ended up in the hands of the Texas Rangers. Several years after Colt finally goes bankrupt and is out elsewhere trying to find some opportunity to restart his firearms company, there's a group of 15 Texas Rangers under the command of Captain Jack Hayes. At this point, Sam Houston is no longer the president of the Republic of Texas. And therefore, the peace that he's brokered with the Comanches at the time has gone by the wayside. And the Comanches are now warring against the Texians and all the incoming settlers. And unfortunately for Texas at the time, they're having some budget issues, so they've disbanded their already insignificant army. And the only thing standing between them and total anarchy is a 40-man Ranger force. The Texas Rangers largely leave the Comanches alone unless they've done something egregious, and in 1844 they did. The Comanches had done a raid into Texas territory and they'd retreated back to their land. And so Jack Hayes had to go after them and deal with this problem. So he led a 15-man group of guys out to a place that we now know of today as Walker Creek. This 15-man group was confronted by a force 5 times larger of Comanche warriors ready and rearing for a fight. And in any other instance, certainly prior to this, probably would have been massacred. But this 15-man force had with them Colt's early Paterson revolvers. So instead of having single-shot pistols, they had 5 rounds loaded and ready to go. And because of that, they managed to effectively defend themselves against this Comanche raiding force. And one of the men under Hayes' command was this kind of scrawny, skinny little guy that we know of today as Sam Walker. And that fight made an impact on Sam Walker. And he realized that there was something to this whole revolver thing.
Sam Walker was one of the great unsung heroes of American history. He was born right here in the Washington, D.C. area, what was called Toping Castle back then. He was about 5'6", probably weighed no more than 112 pounds soaking wet. He was an adventurous guy, for being small and what we'd call scrappy. He joined his older brother James and went off to fight the Seminole Indians in Andrew Jackson's War of 1837 down in Florida. He liked the idea of being on the road and being in the open. So he just decided to go west from there and went to Texas. Became one of the first Texas Rangers. The Rangers back then didn't have a great reputation for, shall we say, uniformity or discipline, but he was able to get a number of them together to form a unit that took the war to the Mexicans in 1847 the way the Mexicans had been fighting the Texans for the previous 10 years, and that's what we now call guerrilla warfare.
So Walker is put in charge of raising the U.S. mounted rifles. And he's basically given a blank check by the United States government. And he seeks Colt out and he says, okay, this is what I want. I want these guns to be big. They end up being 4-pound guns, chambered in .44 caliber. I want 6 shots. I want a long barrel. I want a loading lever. And so it's Walker's ideas of how the Paterson could be improved that result in a gun that really brings Colt as a company back to life. Because Colt wasn't actually making anything at this time.
Colt immediately ran back to Connecticut. The only guy on the planet right then that could actually pull off this miracle was Eli Whitney Jr., the son of the guy that invented the cotton gin. He and his dad had, heard of this idea of interchangeability in the manufacture of parts, mass production. Simeon North, John Hall, down here in Virginia. All of these guys had kind of come up with the this theory that was basically the brainchild of Henri Blanc, a gunsmith at Saint-Étienne in Paris, in France. You know, Colt had literally 65 machines that were made to produce the parts that would make that gun. And he had them running, you know, all the time to fulfill Walker's request, and he got the 1,000 guns in 6 months. A minor miracle. It was the mother of necessity. The necessity of doing that in 6 months was what caused Colt and Whitney to develop what would become mass production. To put it in perspective that we can use today, Walker had received from Sam Colt what would be considered the state of art in military hardware in battle. And with a 6-shot 44 caliber revolver, that's exactly how his fellow officers looked at those revolvers that day when he unboxed them. And yet Walker would live just a few more weeks. During the Battle of Comanche, while he was leading his mounted rifles through the town, he was felled by a shotgun blast from a window and ended up dying in the town square. But that was not before he took his 2 new guns and, having turned the Mexican cannons that had been, you know, fled from just immediately before they arrived, they were still fully charged and loaded, but they had taken the fuses and locks off the cannon. So Walker just turned them around at the retreating Mexicans and fired the pistols at the breech to set them off.
A pair of these guns was made for every trooper in Walker's unit. Each guy, by company, would actually get the gun, and the company number and the number of the gun would be stamped on each one of these guns. The Colt Walker was really a revolutionary gun for its day. It was incredibly powerful. As a matter of fact, it was the most powerful handgun in the world up until the advent of the .44 Magnum. Yes, there were guns that moved bullets faster, but just in terms of the amount of energy created, it was unique.
In the case of Walker, his 2 revolvers were very specifically bequested as he died to Trooper Ashbaugh, because there's more than one eyewitness that says Walker gave his guns to young Ashbaugh. Well, Walker's second in command, Lieutenant Thomas Claiborne, was later charged by the Inspector General of the United States Army in retrieving all of Walker's personal effects and sending them back home to his mother. In 1930s, late 30s, early 40s, Texas gun collector named Quick began compiling a list of all the known Walker Colts in the country. And serial number 109 and 1010 are in the Walker family in 1937. And it's my understanding today Bill Koch owns both a pair of Colts, the most valuable, historically significant pair of handguns in all of American history.
The Walker was a very successful gun in its own right, but it had its problems. It was big. The loading lever was not well thought out. It had a spring in the center of the lever that held it up. And so if the gun was charged, especially with a heavy charge, the loading lever had a tendency to flop down. So Colt decided, well, this could be improved upon. So they came out with basically an abbreviated, a smaller version of the Walker, which was still a big hunkin' gun. 44 caliber, it was called the Dragoon model. There were 3 different models of it, and it was used by the military, U.S. military, in limited numbers, and was popular with civilians as well. Eventually, Colt found out that they could produce belt-sized pistols in 44 caliber, and the 1860 Army was born, and goodbye Dragoon.
What the Walker did was put Colt back in the gun business. It was the tooling that was created to make these guns that allowed Colt to make Colts again, because, again, Samuel Colt had nothing to do with guns for almost a period of a decade. So he was able to reestablish a factory, this time in Hartford, Connecticut, and go into revolver production.